insights from parts of the world that we don't usually hear from, specifically when it comes to investment, VC, and startups, and finding digital and tech solutions to today's main challenges and main problems. In this next discussion, we're going to focus on scaling ventures, specifically navigating global markets with VC funds and tech accelerators with practical examples of how this is happening. This panel will explore how VC funds and tech accelerators strategically prepare for market expansion across several different sectors. I'm delighted to also introduce the moderator of this panel. She's a former colleague, a fellow journalist. She is a dynamic communicator with over 2 decades of experience in this field, focusing on finance, media, and corporate communications. And she's also a former TV anchor at CNBC. Please welcome Sarah Cocker.
Mike, yes, thanks so much, Jessie. We've worked together before. You made me sound a little bit old there, 2 decades of experience. But yeah, we've had the pleasure of working together and across many different platforms as well. I'm super, super excited about our next panel discussion. Jessie gave us a good introduction talking about VC. We've been hearing across GITEX and Superbridge last couple of days, the importance from the side of the people that are invested in through to the investors, which I'm really happy to have on the stage with me now. A lot of the names you will know from the region, but also some international guests that can give us that global perspective on investing. And also some tips if you are looking for investment out there, what they're looking at and what trends they're going to see. And also, things that maybe cause a little bit of fractiousness between that VC relationship and the investor. So we'll be talking about all of that over the next 40 minutes, but I'm delighted to invite up to the stage Mr. Jack Selby, Managing Director at Thiel Capital. I'm sure many of you know Peter Thiel's family office in LA that he's part of, and the Arizona Venture Fund, AZVC, and one of the PayPal Mafia. So please grab a seat. Ruby Liu, Managing Partner at Atypical Ventures in China. She's going to let the numbers speak for themselves. 12 unicorns, 8 exits, so pretty strong performance there. So Ruby, come on up, sit wherever you like. And Noor Suede, the Managing Partner at Global Ventures here in the UAE. A lot of experience in the emerging markets VC space, particularly focusing on Egypt, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Nigeria, with $300 million of assets under management. And from EMEA Plug and Play, the Managing Partner, Sina Amidi. He's been focusing on new materials and packaging program and food beverage program. So a big round of applause, please, for my panelists here as we dive on down into the VC space. So all grab your mics. And I think they're all turned on for you. So we've got an international audience here, obviously a bit of a regional focus as well. So maybe I'll start with you first, Noor, because you have this fund right in the middle of all of this. When we're looking at these VC funds and tech accelerators and how they're preparing for the market expansion, what are we seeing as they maybe move from regional to global, and what are we seeing in the regional space as well?
Well, thank you for having me and for the great introduction and for putting me first in the spotlight. So I think the region is really at an inflection point. I speak from personal experience. When we started the firm just over 5 years ago, the regional ecosystem for MENA of all venture deals, all year, all VCs, was $400 million. Last year, we had a record $3 billion. Again, all deals, all countries, all year. So that tells you the size of our ecosystem. $3 billion for most people is one very large round in Silicon Valley. It's our entire ecosystem. So when you start with that mindset and you start talking about global expansion or regional expansion, it comes with a very different contextual setting than somewhere where you're sitting and the ecosystem is $300 billion or even higher, like in some markets. So when we think about companies based in the region, whether it's the accelerators or Series A investing, which is what we do, that are scaling globally, we really focus on leapfrogging industries. So when we, in 2018, had our first fund, there was a bit of an emphasis on fintech and financial inclusion, with the thinking that our part of the world still had 85% unbanked, and if somewhere was going to crack this from a technology perspective in order to create change for hundreds of millions of people, it was going to be here. In 2020, we had the same attitude towards health tech, and again, we'll never have enough doctors. We're at 1 doctor per 1,000. For context, Europe's at 4.5 per 1,000. And so given we're never going to build enough banks to do financial inclusion, we're never going to build enough hospitals to do healthcare access, and so we leapfrog. And what we see with these leapfrogging companies is the global expansion. Because they're coming into our market saying, here's a really dire problem, and here's cutting-edge technology. And what we do not have are incumbents or legacy systems or the old way of doing things, so you don't have to overcome all of those. What we do not have are regulators in your way, you have regulators on your side. And so with that infrastructure on regulators, with that lack of incumbents, companies are able to just build what makes sense today, given today's technology, and leapfrog, and then scale globally. And indeed, we have about just under a third of our portfolio are companies that now have more revenues globally than regionally. And when we invested, they were only regional. And they span these industries that are leapfrogging into next generation tech out of the region.
And you raise a really good point. Because of my 2 decades of experience, I remember that with the sort of developed markets, shall we say, there used to be these legacy systems that were seen as a positive, particularly in telecoms and areas like that. And now we're seeing, particularly with emerging markets, that freedom from not having those legacy systems. So, Ruby, I wanted to bring you in on that. You know, is that your experience? Are you experiencing more freedom, shall we say, from your perspective to invest in different areas?
Well, in the past, I've been a VC for 20 years. So I must say, in the past 20 years, we enjoy a lot of freedom. Right now, the freedom has been shrunk by the politicians' sort of bickering between China and US. We used to be able to freely invest in both China and US. But I think Nor's point about entrepreneurs that when that she invests here, they have to have a global viewpoint. I think the Chinese entrepreneurs or the US entrepreneurs, like I tend to find like because the domestic market is large enough, so they can crack the domestic market first, develop a very solid product, and then take it 3 to 5 years later, take it global. So it's actually like, I guess it's very interesting, like different perspective in terms of how market develop.
Yeah, so that's really interesting to see 2 opposite perspectives. Sina, from your viewpoint, what are you seeing?
So, for sure there isn't these big corporations that have a lot of bureaucracy, but there are their own challenges. I mean, the region is really interested in trends, and once someone gets into a trend, they follow on 100%. So if you click, you can keep going very, very fast. There is a lot of government support and a lot of support in order to start your company here or to start a startup here, but it's not easy to navigate. It doesn't have the 50 years of software being built and rules, but the bureaucracy was built quite quickly, and I think it's sometimes not as easy to navigate as it would be when it's built over time.
So Jack, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, not so focused in there on the accelerators and stuff, more on the trends that you're seeing, because you get to sit in different offices around the world and see different trends out there. So coming up on the landscape of innovation and entrepreneurship, what are you seeing as trends that you like within the monies that you've managed?
So I think the dominant trend, at least coming from a US family office VC perspective, is that we're just in a distinctly different interest rate environment than what we had been for, up until 2021. There were 12 to 13 years of a gravy train, 0 interest rates, and now we're in a distinctly different environment. And I think one way that impacts this region, as an example, and Nora would know more about this than I would, but there would be a lot of people that would parachute into this region from the U.S. or elsewhere. But now I would suspect that's not happening hardly, if at all. And the reason for that is that so many overvalued investments were made in 19, 20, 21, and ourselves, we're certainly guilty, and so many of our peers are as well, but we made a lot of very overvalued investments. And so we're back triaging this portfolio, and we don't have time to parachute into places like this or India, and we can't even do it geopolitically in China anymore because of what Ruby had talked about. So I think that is a dominant factor that's going on in VC right now.
I think that gives us another really good point to focus on is let's take the temperature on the market at the moment, because as you said, the macro picture has changed quite a lot. So Noor, from your perspective, there's some challenging headwinds, or there certainly have been in terms of financing and all the rest of it. So how is that being navigated on the ground? Are people in the triage situation, or is there some bright spots? We want to keep the audience maybe cheered up out there that there are some bright spots.
I think when you run a VC firm, you are permanently in a triage situation. There are always challenges to be resolved and companies to be supported. I think the region has had a couple of things historically that we've considered disadvantages that are suddenly proving to be huge advantages. So first and foremost, the lack of capital in the ecosystem has meant that entrepreneurs need to be capital efficient from the get-go, financially sustainable early in the company life cycle, and therefore when capital does dry up, and here it's always been relatively dried up, they can still survive. So as a result, we run a Series A fund, and a quarter of our portfolio is EBITDA positive, which is unheard of globally. But that's always been the case for us because these companies want to ensure their growth and survivability, whether or not venture exists, because there's no concept of I'll burn through $10 million and find 10 million more tomorrow. So that's really now proven to be incredibly helpful, along with the fact that the lack of capital in the ecosystem simply meant that the ecosystem never blew up valuations that other ecosystems did. So we've always had relatively reasonable multiples, reasonable valuations, reasonable expectations from founders. And now they have kind of gone down a little bit, but it's a little bit, not a lot. And so the portfolios of the VCs are adjusting a little bit, not a lot. And that's a good thing. And I think we're always looking towards future trends. So finally, as we think, we thought about fintech, we thought about health tech. Now there's a massive move towards food security. So what's agri-tech doing in the region? Again, it's a leapfrogging thing. There aren't these massive agricultural industries that we have to fight as incumbents. What's supply chain tech doing? We still import 90% of everything. So what does manufacturing look like for the future? What is the cutting edge manufacturing, and how do we get there? Again, lack of incumbents, helpful regulation. So we're able to continue to go from industry to industry as we build out the region from a technology perspective with reasonable valuations and companies that are financially sustainable. So a little bit decoupled from what Jack's saying.
Yeah, and Sina, from your perspective, do you want to add to that?
So for VCs, it's been very hard. I mean, you get judged on your last fund in the last 2 years.
We can give you some water. I know you've been running around town.
In the last 2 years of your fund. So right now for VCs, it is quite difficult. I think there are always, thank you so much, there are always good investments and there's always exceptions. In the region, it's definitely much better to invest in a region that is growing and that has hope and that is looking at a brighter future than somewhere that is a little bit more stagnant. So there's a lot of opportunities here, and people are willing to take that risk. I think the rest of the world is seeing that, and they're coming here in order to take that risk with this part of the world. And I think we're a little bit tired of what's going on in the rest of the world. So maybe not just in VC, but in everything else, it is a little bit hard to be in a stagnant environment.
And Ruby, you kind of alluded to that in your first answer, the headwinds that you're facing in terms of regulation, touching on geopolitics there. But because there's such a big domestic market in China, are you seeing that that's offering a level of protection to some of these VCs?
Yeah. Look, VCs, people pay us to gamble for the big return. If you invest in VC, you don't think they can return minimum 10x your money, run as fast as you can. Because, right now, interest rates 5 to 6%. If you are afraid of risk, you should put your money in the bank. But for me, 5 to 6 times return, 5 to 6% return is terribly boring, right? In the past, if you give me $1, I returned historically $100 to you. But the gravy trains left the station, so we no longer have this kind of gravy train. But minimally, responsibly, Jack is a trustee of an endowment, and his one voice got the endowment to invest in me, and I was just telling him minimally we should be able to return 5 times minimum. And this is a 3-year-old fund. I can already see that, but my goal is to minimum return 10x to people in order to take the kind of risk with VCs. Risk is huge. So if it's your personal money, don't invest in VCs. It's like 10 to 15 years old fund. And unless they can go to casino for you and win big time, forget about it. I have a deal where we made over $10 billion one single deal. And that's the kind of return you want in a VC. So forget about good times, bad times, 5% interest rate or 10% interest rate. If you have a fund like Jack, endowment or pension or sovereign wealth fund, you should allocate certain amount, maybe 5%. Yale Endowment, which is one of the best performing fund, they've had over 30%, 30% in alternative asset.
You've raised a really good point to add there. I want to get your perspective on what is a good return now, given the markets and those higher interest rates.
I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, no, dive on in. Yeah.
So here, we're seeing a lot of Chinese companies come, and we've even heard some companies yesterday asking for funding from here in China. We keep saying China is a big enough domestic market, but it seems quite busy, and it seems that globally, there's a globalization of Chinese companies. Can you give me your take on that? Why are so many Chinese companies globalizing even before they've fully taken the Chinese market?
That's a good question. If you're an ambitious entrepreneur, you should not think about just the domestic market. From day one, you should be grounded in your domestic market to make the best product, but you should make a product for global. So first generation of Chinese, they are very provincial, they don't have role models, so they only target. At that time, when I first started being a VC, $1 billion IPO, we go, hooray! Now $1 billion is boring. The company, and I deeply believe Middle East will go through this transformation, assuming the leadership, the political leadership is driving the region to the right direction. You should be able to deliver at scale, global product, because you have generations of learning as entrepreneurs. The first generation, they target 1 billion. The second generation target 5 billion. Nowadays, TikTok being one of my girlfriends. She's a first investor in TikTok. She on her book right now, and they've managed to sell some $45 billion net profit from one single deal. That's why I'm still working after 20 years, because I want to beat that. Okay, so, you should, I believe here, 10 years from now, I love the regions like energy, the 10x vision, the 10x vision. The next time it should be 100x vision and be the global leader regionally here.
So thank you, Ruby. And whereas I hope that that's the case 5 and 10 years from now, I think the regional ecosystem has had one question for the last 5 years that we are now starting to overcome, and hopefully we'll get there too. And it's, are there any exits? So everybody says in the region, yes, we would like to invest in VC, but there are never any exits, there are never any exits, there are never any exits, which is unfair. So my personal background as an operator, I had 2 exits, 1 IPO and 1 private equity sale, and that's as an operator from the region, 1 global company, 1 regional company. And then when I transitioned to being an investor, and we started the firm 5 years ago, I kept hearing the region has no exits, which I knew was untrue from my operating background. But as an investor, the approach we've taken, simply to prove the market, is more of a private equity risk with venture capital returns. So our portfolio construction is such that once a company hits 6 or 7 times on a return, then we must consider an exit, whether it's going to be a $10 billion company or a $1 billion company at the time, just to validate that there's a secondary market that we can structure exits. And at this point in time, our first fund, which was a 2018 vintage, sits at a 0.7 something DPI, almost a 0.8 DPI. We just had an exit yesterday at 7.2x, 99.5%, thank you, IRR. And so the point at this part of the evolution of the ecosystem, rather than getting to the 100 billion IPOs, we're happy to take $1 billion IPOs or $5 billion IPOs for now and just prove it's possible. And now we've hit that traction point where companies are going from copycat companies, which China experienced, to real innovation and global companies and really deep tech solutions that are coming out from here that are being implemented in the US with the biggest corporates, right? And we will get to the point that Ruby's talking about in the next iteration, maybe the next couple of funds, we'll see that. But I think the last few have just demonstrated the viability of the ecosystem, the actual exits, and the growth of the market. And for the market to go from 400 million to 3 billion in 5 years is almost 10x growth just on a market level. And hopefully we'll see 10x more over the next few years.
I wanted to build on that concept of scale. I was showing you this morning, I was looking at something before I came out today where one of the founders of Airbnb was told, your business isn't big enough and it won't be able to scale. So we've talked about scalability there and the future and what that's going to look like. From your perspective, maybe starting with Jack, what have you seen on the ideas that you think have got massive upsides, or maybe some stuff that's disappointed, but let's be optimistic, something that surprised you on the upside that you thought maybe wouldn't work?
Sure. So I'll pick up on Noor's point. So used to run the international operations for PayPal many years ago. And so came here, tried to figure out how do we establish PayPal in the Middle East. And this is back circa 2000, 2001. And the issue was, or the main issue that I could identify is that you have all these different payment systems in each country. So you have Saudi, you have Kuwait, you have here, Qatar, and so forth. And that's really complex. And so sitting back in Palo Alto, are we going to spend time and money and engineers and so forth trying to figure out how to solve this problem? The answer is no, we're not, because the opportunity cost of that expense, so to speak, is just too high. And they're much lower hanging fruit for us to try to pick back in Silicon Valley. And so what that means in terms of the opportunity set here is that if you're a local entrepreneur and if you could have solved that PayPal equivalent problem for us, you always have a question, do you buy it or do you build it? And this comes back to the outcome question that Noor just brought up. We would buy all day long whoever could figure out how to set up the PayPal equivalent here in the Middle East. And I think the copycat topic that you just brought up, I think that it's often denigrated. And I think it's unfair because I would love for somebody to figure out how to copycat PayPal here so we could buy it and figure it out for us. And we're happy to pay a healthy multiple for that. So again, I think that's, and you're talking about, well, what's the big outcome? Well, for us, if someone can do that from scratch, and if it takes them 3 years or 5 years or 10 years, we will happily pay the requisite multiple to do that. Because for us to do it ourselves, coming in from halfway around the world, and the complexity and the cultural differences, that's something we'll never be able to figure out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. And let's go through everyone, because I know, Noor, you alluded to post-COVID, everyone's obsessed with food security, and there's some themes coming up there. Apart from that theme, what are you seeing in the space that you're in that people should be aware of in terms of investment trends, something that's scalable?
She didn't
So
have
I think that the
facial hair.
topic of climate is top of everyone's mind, and I think that as an emerging market,
No.
it's not really top of our
You
mind.
wouldn't want to.
I think that we're much more focused on can we make financial returns and so on. And fortunate enough that our first fund sits in a top decile financial performance globally, so we then have the privilege of being able to talk about things that are a little bit softer. But when we think about things like climate, my conviction is everything is climate. So we have a company that is in the agri-tech food security space in one of our portfolio companies, in one of our funds, and they reduce the energy consumption for vertical farming by 95%. Right? They're based between Saudi and Dubai. They're now retrofitting vertical farms in Arizona and Wisconsin. This is becoming a really global company. It's called Red Sea. It's an amazing technology. The IP is all regional. So you take a look and you say, that is indeed agri-tech / food security, because the problem of vertical farming is energy consumption is so high, it's not commercially scalable. So now we fixed how much energy you need, 95% less because of the way they desalinate water, which is the largest component. So you get to that point, like this is real innovation, real technology coming out of the region, globally scalable and implementable, not CapEx heavy, agri-tech, but if I were running a climate fund, I would raise a flag and say this is climate. So I think where the region is now kind of focused is a lot of these, as a VC, a lot of the capital globally is going to what's climate tech, what's next in climate, and we're sitting saying everything for us is climate. Mobility becomes climate, agri-tech becomes climate. So we're starting to see these opportunities where the regional founders are building things that are more sustainable from the get-go because energy is either expensive, non-viable, and with that innovation, I think they're going globally more quickly, to your point, Ruby.
So, Amina, I'll bring you in on that. As Noor quite rightly says, environment is everything. I guess we could add in tech into that basket as well, because that's everything. What are you seeing?
So there's a lot of interesting areas, and if you look at enough spaces, you'll find that every industry has something that's interesting in it. So in food, I love food security, but I also like synthetics. I love AI in everything. Supply chain, we've seen the massive issue. So in every sector, there's something interesting and something that is revolutionary being done currently. I think what's really interesting is we have to be able to pinpoint that and invest in it and not get caught up in the noise. So if there is a lot of sustainability funds because we all want the world to be better, then we need to make sure we're not overvaluating the startups we're investing in because there's too much powder in that. We need to make sure we're not investing only because we're trying to hit a percentage of, hitting the goals of the fund and the strategy you created for the fund. And these traps is what's happening for a lot of VCs, and it's trapping a lot of the money into very specific sectors. But for an entrepreneur, check to see where the money's trapped and figure out a way to unlock it for you. Because you can say you're retail, but you can say you're sustainable retail. You can say you're supply chain, but you can say you're sustainable supply chain. So find a way to get into that crack and unlock the potential. Because there is money in the world, and if it's not in the region, you can raise it outside and bring it to the region. And there's no reason why you can't say, I will start here and then take it global.
So Ruby, over 20 years, you've been cutting through a lot of noise. When you cut through that right now, what are you seeing? What are you liking to invest in, and what do you see a future in?
Because I do very early stage, so I follow the best people. I follow the people that, ambitious, willing to work 24/7, take my phone calls at 11 p.m. at night. When I can't go to sleep, I call my entrepreneurs because I want to get my trouble off my head and then give it to them so that I can go to sleep. They solve the problem, right? So, I think, opportunities, I totally agree. I think climate change is one of the biggest opportunity. However, the ROI is not so sexy compared to the SaaS, the software, and the internet. AI, it's a huge, there's just so many opportunities. But above all, being the early stage VC, follow the right people. Give money to the people that you are willing to work for them.
We're just about to run out of time, so I'm going to go super quick on this because I want to allude to that last point and everybody to have an input there. How hard is it to sit in the back of the car as a VC and not grab that steering wheel when you're seeing other people maybe not doing what you think they should be?
Okay, that's a very good question because after being a VC for a long time, and I decided, hey, every day I'm sitting in boardrooms telling people what to do. I'm going to show them I can do it too. So after 15 years, I launched a company, and I got lucky. I got lucky. The company did go public last year, but it was, it's like a mere over $1 billion. It's a small return compared to what I'm best at, which is being a VC, supporting the more people who are more ambitious, who are better entrepreneurs than me. So I'm totally okay sitting in the back seat.
I think what's harder is letting your entrepreneurs that don't deserve the time anymore to fail and forcing them to fail. We invest in 200 companies a year, and you want to give love to all of them, but you don't have time to give love to all of them. And some of them should give up on their ideas and move on, and they don't take your advice. So you don't always need to step in to help, but forcing them to fail is sometimes much harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's like being a parent, right? So, Noel, what's been your experience?
I don't think it's hard to sit in the backseat because I don't think the job is to drive. I think it's more important as the VC to make sure you've backed the right founders and to make sure that actually the road is paved well, there are no potholes. If there are, try to remove them before the driver gets there, that the fuel tank is full, right? That's the job of the VC rather than to drive. The founder's job is to drive.
And so I'll steal this from Ruby because we talked about this in the green room before the panel, and I'll lose the car analogy, so I apologize. But
No, that's okay.
Ruby said, and I totally agree with this, tells the entrepreneurs, don't call me with your good news. I don't care. That's your job. Only call me with your bad news because that's my job to help you. And that's literally, that crystallized it perfectly. So to your credit.
So in one word now, AI everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. Game changer or overhyped? Jack?
It's ubiquitous, so it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
I'm going to go with the same thing. It's going to be embedded in everything.
It's not very new.
Game changer. Believe in it. Believe in belief.
Well, thank you so much. We're out of time. I think we've given the audience a lot of things to think about there. Thank you so much for joining us on stage, Jack, Ruby, Noor, and Sina, and I'm sure they'll be around for you to have a chat with, but thank you so much for your time today.